my sense of the way it worked is the Russians specialized in looking out for people who were gay, especially before being gay was legalized. They would have studied, and they did study, and the studies were intense, the British upper class. That was their target. It was their target back in the 20s.
I seem to remember they all were given a copy of Anthony Sampson's The Anatomy of Britain and instructed to read it before they ever started even operating in Britain.
That's the upper level. Anthony Sampson's book was great, and he used Who Owns Britain in his reissue. But no, the targeting would have been much more finessed. They would have been looking out for subtle signals, signals that the chap wasn't straight, that he was gay. And they would really focus in on that. And I think they did it in a much more comprehensive way than we understand. There's too much focus on the Cambridge spies. I think there were spies in Oxford as well. This is what the Russians looked for. How could they only find 5?
Well, I mean, this does make me wonder why there's all this Russophobia, is because those in power who are criminals know that the Putin has got all these cards up his sleeve still if he wanted to use them.
They've refined them. They have refined them a lot. Far from it. It's not just because Putin's ex-KGB. All the intelligence services, ours and theirs, have refined the situation. They all do mass surveillance, but the psycho-surveillance and the analysis of the databases they create from the surveillance is very advanced. And again, the British media don't write anything about it. And it's quite widely known what they're up to. A key book was published, wait for this, in 2008, in which James Bamford, a very eminent and talented American ex-serviceman journalist, he pointed out all the evils that the National Security Agency were up to, and that's 12 years ago. Now, anything the National Security Agency were doing, the Russians were doing as well, and the Chinese.
Well,
those are the key ones.
Let's get up to today, because we've got the main sort of thing going on, ding-donging between us and the former Soviet Union, is this whole business with Alexei Navalny. Now, he's been sentenced to 3.5 years, I believe. He's known to be very chummy with a chap called Khodorkovsky, who was booted out of Russia. A lot of financial contacts with him. But what do you make of Navalny and the so-called poisoning in his underpants with this amazing stuff, Novichok, which may or may not exist? According to my sources, it may even just have been a Russian a bit of information that was given, which is a chemical that doesn't actually work, in order to see if someone was passing the formulas to the West, which it wasn't, which they were, by the way. They were found out, yes, they were passing them to the West, and they were arrested as a result. But anyway, what do you make of the whole Navalny case? We've now got this guy called Bellingcat, who seems to be one of the main people who's been outing his critics mainly.
The stuff Bellingcat have come up with is absolutely amazing. They found the grandmother or the aunt or something of one of the people alleged to have done the bad deed in Salisbury. But what our media have never written, there are two things our media have not disclosed, and I feel they should have. All the news is that the Russians have this nerve gas. So do Porton Down, and so do South Africa. Now, and Israel. I think we should have been told, and so does the United States. But all the focus was and the inference was, this is unique, it's unique to the Russians. It's not. So we weren't told. And the second thing we weren't told is that the chap who was attacked, what's it called, the Sergei thing in Salisbury. Skripal had gone back to business, and he was selling Russian secrets. We weren't told anything about that. It was glossed over. He was kind of in the private security business. He was a lot further in than that.
Yeah, but I think the main point about the Skripal story is he was trying to go back to Russia. He'd written a letter to Putin asking him to be pardoned so he could return. He'd had enough of working for MI6 here in the UK. So, of course, this could quite easily, since we haven't actually had statements from Skripal himself at all, it could quite easily be that the British have just decided, well, no, he's not going back to Russia, and he's going to stay here. We're going to, keep a very close eye on him, and he's definitely not going home. But we've got to come up with a story in order to cover that fact. But anyway, look, getting back to Navalny, do you think, I mean, we're hearing a lot more about this guy. When I started looking into him, it's quite clear he was one of the people raping Russia back in the 1990s during the time of the Yeltsin era, where basically asset stripping companies and selling them off. And he himself was one of the most corrupt people in the country. It's not surprising that he doesn't have much support. Even the BBC last weekend admitted that there weren't many people at this anti-Putin Navalny rally. So what do you make of this guy, Kevin?
As I say, unfortunately, I haven't had time to look into his background. I had a fair bit on my plate recently, but it's curious, and it looks as if the West is trying to use him to pull off a coup in Russia, like the one in Ukraine, the Velvet Revolution.
Well, that was
Western. That was a complete
I
Western.
think they're going to have much luck. They might pull it off on TV, but not anywhere else. And it's only really the television, I think. And this is why I'm so disgusted with the journalism around this, is that this guy has got no political power in Russia at all. He's a has-been from the 1990s. But he's being put forward constantly as, the main opposition to Putin. Well, he is only on the pantomime television news programs that we have here in the West. Yeah. It's not in any way really a threat to Putin. He's an annoyance, and he's now been locked up for corruption. But anyway, I'll put a link up to the some of the stuff about him, which is not written from a Channel 4 News or a Western media point of view, about who is Alexei Navalny. But we're going to hear now from one of his best chums, who happens to be our Bristol Mayor, Marvin Rees, who came out last weekend. I was absolutely stunned to see, talking about what a lovely guy he is and how hard he fought corruption in Russia. Well, Mr. Marvin Rees, I have to tell you, you have turned truth totally on its head there, because he was raping the country and stealing its resources. He certainly wasn't trying to uncover corruption. So let's have a listen to Bristol's Mayor Marvin Rees, concerned about what he calls his brave friend Alexei Navalny, speaking on Sky News.
Well, it's called the Yale Award Fellows Program. Every year they take 15 or so people from around the world, and you go to university, you spend about 4 or 5 months there. And when I arrived, that's where I met Alexei. We were neighbours. Because we had children, our families were with us, we were in the same block, so we lived next door to each other, along with Ricardo Terán from Nicaragua and Lumumba Diaping from Southern Sudan. I'm just the mayor of Bristol who's met a man who has committed his life to exposing fraud in Russia that's taken money out of the pockets of millions upon millions of people and putting it into the hands of a few well-positioned people at the top. And that's the man, I know. And I'm horrified about what's happening to him. I'm very concerned about his family. But I know it's not just me. I know there are many thousands of people, but certainly in the small group I know, many hundreds of people around the world who are also concerned and just dismayed about what's going on in Russia.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the Kremlin have used Navalny's time at Yale, to push that narrative that he is a puppet of the West?
Oh, without question. It was in November when we were at university. Alexei came into our common room and was talking about a new fraud he just uncovered with the Eastern Siberian Pacific oil pipeline. I think it was about $4 billion. And a number of the Yale fellows, Ana Paula, who worked on drug policy in Mexico, so she was at the front end of things as well. Ana Paula, Lumumba, Sergei Legitimacy, they were all saying, Alexei, it might not be wise for you to go back. When you're exposing £4 billion of fraud, that's very, very serious. It's not going to be safe. Alexei's point was, if I don't go back, they are going to say, I am a puppet of the West. They're going to say, I've been at Yale, I'm associated with the CIA. They're going to spread all these rumors. And so he went back. in the face of all the warnings from his fellow world fellows about the threats to his own and his family's safety. And you just have to admire that. A brave man, he knew what was coming, and what's happened is exactly what he said would happen. I just hope that people can see through it for what it is.
Well, I hope that people can see through what you just said, Bristol Mayor, so-called Labour Mayor Marvin Rees, for what it is, which is a load of nonsense. Yale is the headquarters also, isn't it, of the Skull and Bones, Kevin? That's where, that secret society, which, in fact, on the podcast of this programme, you should hear Anthony Sutton chatting about what he thinks of the Skull and Bones secret society from Yale University. But look, the main point is this guy is one of Khodorkovsky's little gophers, and these are the oligarchs that tried to destroy Russia. Really, the plan was to sell it all off, everything, and then it to be just owned like the West is owned by finance and big business, like the BBC is owned, and the rest of these organisations, that the finance and big business just buys its way in to everything. So anything that's articulate, intellectual and critical of big business is just bought up and shut down. And this is the kind of guy Alexei Navalny is. And actually, I wonder whether this is the kind of guy our Bristol Mayor Marvin Rees is too.
Is your Bristol Mayor saying anything else, Tony?
Not really, no. He's just saying he's a lovely guy, he's my chum, he's my friend, and he's not really talking about the fact that he's one of the people who was sent in to rape the country in the 1990s, along with the oligarchs who were trained up in Switzerland, where, by the way, Khodorkovsky is returned to now. So basically Putin's attitude to all of this was, I think, a very mature, sensible, and I'd like to see that attitude in every single country where these oligarchs try and take hold, which is to say to them, well, you're gangsters, I'm a gangster, but I'm actually president too, and you can do your gangster stuff, but if you even so much as think about trying to take power from the Kremlin, then you're out on your ear roll. And he's done a very good job, for example, with Berezovsky, who was the head of the oligarchs. He turned the tables on him because Berezovsky thought that Putin was going to be, as president, his little puppet. And literally weeks after he took over in 2000, Putin turned the tables on Berezovsky. He dug up some old charges against him, which had been quashed by Yeltsin, about the privatization of Aeroflot, the national airline, and which was all showed how crooked it was, and he got this money through Switzerland. And he said phoned up Berezovsky and said, well, look, mate, I haven't been able to stop this prosecution and I can't stop it. But what I will say is if you get out of the country tonight, I'll do what I can to stop the prosecution. And, of course, Berezovsky very sensibly got on the next plane out of Russia to London, and he never came back. And that was how Putin took back control of Russia from the oligarchs. Of course, that sent a very strong message to the other oligarchs. Since Berezovsky was the top guy, and others have tried to take out Putin and take out the Russian government in succeeding years, but failed. So going back to these Yale World Fellows, this is an amazing thing because this is one of obviously both Alexei Navalny and Marvin Rees were part of these, and every year the programme selects 16 World Fellows to reside at Yale for the fall semester to study and share their knowledge and expand their networks. Well, it's interesting that this is coming from the university, which is the headquarters of the Skull and Bones Society, which was formed by the Russell Trust, which made its money from the opium trade, and is also known as the Brotherhood of Death. So Marvin Rees was tapped up as a young man to be one of these people, and one has to ask why is it and how is it that somebody like our mayor gets put on this conveyor belt to power. It's been compared very much to the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford, where people just who haven't actually passed exams or anything to get into a university just get told you're going to be getting a world-class university education. So you're basically being put on to do PPE or something like a kind of prime minister's degree, even though you haven't actually earned your way onto that course. We're going to give you this opportunity. And who gets a chance to do that? Someone with lots of money. Anyway, so what do you make of all of this, Kevin? Am I over-egging the pudding? I think no,
not at all. I mean, it's how our system runs here, and very few, particularly from the West, note the intense similarity between America and Russia. Both countries are run by oligarchs, just different oligarchs. But American public life is governed by money. Russian public life is governed by money. They're almost identical.
Okay, we're going to end part one now. We managed to do almost all of that without talking about COVID at all, which I think is a great achievement. And we're going to go on in part two to look at the latest to do with the so-called pandemic, whether it really is or not. Of course, is another question. And before that, we're going to hear some music. Now, I just thought, simply because we heard it last year. But it's one of the best, I think, songs to do with the pandemic. It's called COVID-19, the Musical, by the group. And I'll say that in a minute. But anyway, so thanks very much to former Sunday Times rich journalist and author of Who Owns Britain, Kevin Carhill. He'll be back with me after this as we take our weekly look around the world. But right now, it's COVID-19, the Musical. Frankie Goes to Nowhere.